Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our special finance committee meeting, well, regular finance committee meeting, where we have two items on the agenda. The first item is housing items 1A. It's a housing consultant update report. Mr. Rant.
Pryor, thank you. At the July meeting for County Council, you all asked that the presentation that we were going to do next week be brought to you all as an update from our consultant on where we are on developing our comprehensive housing plan. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Davis, who's going to introduce the consultant and lay the context for this plan update.
Okay.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Tonight, we will be presenting the first early draft of the Charleston County Comprehensive Housing Plan, Housing Our Future. Since last October, we have been diligently at work assessing the county's housing needs, conducting community engagement, and engaging with every municipality in the county about how to approach housing in Charleston County. We've also been strategizing with different community partners, with nonprofit organizations, and private developers about how to move forward with the plan. So tonight, Council has convened to talk about that permanent source for housing and how to move forward. And with that, I will turn it over to our consultants, Development Strategies, who will walk you through the draft of our plan. Thank you.
All right, sir, the floor is yours. If you would speak loud enough so they can hear you through the mics.
You bet. Mr. Chairman, thank you. And thank you for that introduction. Daryl, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. All right. Well, if Miriam can go ahead and share screen, we'll get started. And just thank you for inviting us to your special meeting this evening. We know that you've got a lot to consider this week. And so Miriam and I are looking forward to sharing this presentation with you, telling you, kind of giving you a highlight of what we've been working on, especially since we saw you last in April. And then what we plan to work on over the next coming months. And as Mr. Davis said, kind of highlight the emergent comprehensive housing strategy, Housing Our Future. So to start off, just a quick overview of the planning process that we laid out at the end of last year and that we've been working through this year. Step one, spent the first part of the winter and spring really understanding the housing context, having stakeholder roundtables, meeting with officials and staff across the county, and really doing a deep dive into the analysis to understand what the housing needs and considerations are for Charleston County. We've been spending the better part of the spring and summer really starting to work onto the strategies. What are the tools and the programs and partnerships that we can put together in a plan, in a comprehensive plan, to tackle these issues, tackle these needs, and understanding what's going to resonate and evaluating what will really work for Charleston County. We're going to be spending the next couple of months, the next several months, working on the implementation phase of the plan and taking this sort of the strategies, the what that we want to propose to do, and then looking at how we get it done. Who's going to do it? Who are the partners that are there to actually help the county achieve its goals? And even possibly where is, some of the strategies should be targeted. And so that's what we'll be kind of walking through right now, kind of give you some highlights of the first couple of phases, especially, like I said, since we saw you last in April, and then talk a bit about the implementation phase. We've been working with your steering committee in earnest, really, since April. We've been working virtually and in person with them, meeting a couple of times, almost every other week for several of these months, working through this process of understanding the needs, taking those needs into strategies, and then working with them on priorities and timing here this fall. So just wanted to kind of highlight their role in this, and it's been significant. As we start to, as we get started tonight, I just wanted to kind of reframe what the elements are that go into a comprehensive housing strategy. and really just sort of walk through this quickly so that you can sort of see these are the areas that we're walking through, that we have walked through, and that we're working on right now. This first phase, early on, as I said, we're defining the needs, we're having conversations, we're doing deep analysis to understand the housing issues across the spectrum of income, marketability, affordability, attainability. We're looking at all of that and defining these needs. The next step is to kind of take what we understand and think about what it is, take what we know from the needs and then understand what is it we're trying to accomplish. What do we want to achieve with this plan, and establishing goals that really become the framework for this comprehensive plan. And I know we've thrown out the term framework before, and it's really the 5 goals that we'll present here in a moment that is that framework. And then we take those goals and we take that framework of goals and we start to understand what are the strategies to achieve those goals. We'll get into that. It is not just about funding. There is policy, there is advocacy, there are programs and services that go along with, all of that to achieve the various goals. We'll start to evaluate what's possible, what's impactful for meeting those needs that we identified early on. And then our final phase to a comprehensive housing plan is to think about implementation. It's not enough to just have the goals and the strategies and just sort of know what we want to do and know what we can do. We've got to actually put a plan in place to get things done. And this is where we start to think about funding. We start to think about phasing and partnerships and what it takes to meet the needs and to achieve the goals of sustainable, attainable housing in Charleston County. So that's the framework. You'll see this sort of repeated throughout our presentation tonight. And when we get started on defining the needs, we really are asking, some key questions. We're doing data analysis, talking to stakeholders, talking to staff, to understand and answer the questions you see here on the screen. What is the needs? What can residents afford? What do they want? What are their goals, from housing ownership to affordable and sustainable renting? Just kind of understanding what that is, and the analysis tells us some of that, and a lot of community conversations tell us that. And then it's doing additional analysis to understand how is Charleston County going to grow. That's population growth, it's job growth, it's understanding that as jobs come into the Charleston County economy, what are they paying in salary, and what does that mean that residents can afford? So you can see how these questions all come together to really help us understand, what is the housing demand. And so we've got methodology in there that gets us to numbers, and that's what you see here. Our demand analysis and our conclusions of this analysis really are saying that Charleston County needs anywhere from 30 to 35,000 new units over the next 10 years to meet the demand that we see coming for the county. And some of that is now, some of that is how you get people from renter to homeowner and kind of the moving around of the now market, but also new units coming into play. And so, yeah, it's a big number. 30 to 35,000 units over the next 10 years is right now more than what is being produced. We take that big number. It's really just, it gives us that sense of overall scale. And we take that and make it more meaningful. That big number isn't real meaningful until you start to understand, well, what does this mean to Charleston County residents? We have population here now and population that's coming into the county that all have different household income levels. And what can they afford for their rent or home buying opportunities? And so we do more analysis, and our methodologies take those big numbers and start to split it up across the income spectrum for residents. On the right-hand side, the 120 to 200 plus side, we kind of think of that as market rate housing, whether it's rental or home ownership. That's the side of the market that really is being met by the market. Developers can come in and provide those units, make money providing those units, and those units are affordable to a certain segment of the population. At the 180 to 120% and below, as you get down further, we think of those as workforce housing, as affordable housing, and that's where that's where we start to see the market not being able to produce the number of housing units needed at that side of the income spectrum. It's hard or even impossible the further down in the affordability range you go for developers to actually meet that and to provide those units without some sort of supports. And we'll talk a little bit about those when we get to one of the particular goals. But this allows us to take that 30 to 35,000 unit number and break it down and understand this really starts the understanding for where the strategies are that Charleston County can use. Some strategies are going to be, on one side of the spectrum, in the middle, or the other. And this really gives us a sense of where we start to hone in on who are we trying to support, who are we targeting with our investments and our limited resources. And that begins to paint that picture for us. And so what you see here is those are the numbers of units that we need. And now we need to kind of start to put a dollar amount to it, right? And we do this by understanding the feasibility. And I'm sure you all understand the concept of kind of development feasibility. What does it take to develop and to produce a unit of housing, whether it's a single family unit or a multifamily unit? How do we think about that? The real simple way is just it's costs versus value. It's the developer's cost of land and construction costs, which we know have gone through the roof significantly over the last couple of years. Things about, it's also pieces of soft costs, whether it's architecture, permitting fees, carrying costs, overhead, and profit, all come into that cost equation. When a unit can be sold or rented at a level where that value is equal to or greater than the costs that the developer has, a project is feasible and a developer will be willing to take that on in sort of a private development market sort of way. However, especially as you move further down, right, the affordability spectrum, the value that you can charge and still have that home ownership or that rent be affordable to the households we're trying to target, that reduces the value. And as there are existing supports out there that affordable housing developers and nonprofit developers can use to kind of fill in that value column, oftentimes there is a gap. And that gap is what makes it very difficult for the private market solely to provide that housing on the affordable side. So what we do is we look at that gap and we think about all of the different kinds of units, renter and home ownership units in that workforce and affordable housing side of the spectrum, and we assign a dollar value to that. Our analysis from talking to developers, talking to staff, diving into the low-income housing tax credit applications over the last several years to understand how those kind of affordable units are coming online, really starts to tell us that that gap, really a minimum of that is about $40,000 per unit. And so when you start to assign that on the affordability side or the $30,000 per unit gap on the workforce housing side, and you look at the number of units there, you start to get an overall dollar amount. And that's where you see, I'd say, from our analysis, a conservative estimate is saying $450 million is needed in gap financing to get affordable units. Another $170 million would be needed for that workforce unit. So you're really looking at $620 million of gap to produce those workforce and attainable housing units over the next 10 years. This is for everything. This is the big picture, right? Some of this is being delivered now, just not enough, and not enough according to our projections. And so that's why I think it is so important to understand these numbers and for you all to have, this comprehensive housing plan. It's a big number, and we get that. And I think there are two things that I want to say about this big number. Next slide, please. The first one is that this number isn't just a county government dollar amount. This is the number that is needed to produce the housing for the county, in the county, yes, but it is not intended to be the number that county government needs to sort of think about targeting, because there are partners. There's state and federal government and programs that change and can change over time and create new resources that the county can tap into. We've got experiences where philanthropy, major employers, and others are coming to the table to help provide services and gap and developing, other ways. And so this dollar amount is sort of the ecosystem's dollar amount. And I just want to make that point and kind of drive that home. And the other point I want to drive home with this slide is really that it's not all just about the dollars. You're going to see as we start to talk about the goals and the strategies here that this is also a plan that takes into account there's private investment that's happening, there's private market that's working. The county and other municipalities, and as I said, state government have programs and resources and existing tools that are part of this equation. And it's perhaps ensuring that those tools are being used the way you want to use them and directed in the directions that you want to use them that may be, informed by this plan and part of the equation. And then there's policies, there's advocacy, there's legislation, there's zoning tools and incentives, and partnerships and coordination with what those other partners are doing that all come into play. And you're going to see that as we dive into the goals and the strategies. So that's the understanding piece. That's understanding how many units we need, how many dollars we need to deliver those units, and then understanding that it's not just about the dollars. So how do we continue to build a plan out of this? Well, now that we understand what that need is, we need to kind of wrap our arms around all of it and start to understand it in ways that is useful to you, useful to Mr. Davis and his staff and other county departments to actually deliver these, as well as the partners that are out in the community. So we, developed with the steering committee these 5 goals and really used these as kind of the way to break it down, this really big, complex issue, into understanding this in pieces that make sense and allow us to target our resources and our programs. And so what we're going to do is we're going to walk through these 5. We're going to walk through these 5 a little bit and kind of dive in a little bit. And what I want to say is we've got a whole wealth of information for all of the strategies that are here, and it would take us a while to dive into all of them. So we're going to hit them and we're going to move along and be happy to answer any questions and dive into them as you see fit. So this first one, expanding capacity of the local ecosystem, is really the foundation. How do we set the county up, the county departments and its partners, including developers and social service providers, for delivering what we're talking about here? On the policy side, this is having that dedicated housing fund that you all are talking about this week. It's talking about how state legislative and advocacy around state legislative issues might be able to set the foundation for future action that you may not be able to do now, but you can in the future. It's talking about those partnerships that I mentioned and ensuring that the developers and that the service providers and the folks that are out there have the resources and the training and the understanding they need to do their jobs perhaps more efficiently. On the next one, we're talking about reducing the barriers to adding needed housing supply. A lot of this actually could, be focused, if you will, on the, on the more market-ready side, maybe on the workforce housing side, and it's just ensuring that regulations like the zoning and land development regulations aren't creating barriers to delivering the kind of units you want. Looking at density, looking at mixed uses, transit-oriented development, aligning these policies and these regulations through the municipalities that you don't directly control, but certainly can have a role in providing housing within those jurisdictions as you move on. We're also talking about investing in the creation and the preservation of attainable housing. This is really how do we utilize the county's resources to create and preserve attainable, affordable housing for Charleston County residents. You could be talking about the county-owned land that we know there is a lot of. County-owned land, using resources for land banking in strategic locations can really impact the land cost side of that feasibility equation and might really be able to catalyze the creation of new housing. The same thing with gap financing. Maybe it's a direct investment in the production and the preservation of that housing. So really exploring that. How do we get those new units online that we talked about? The next one is really focused on renters. It's supporting housing stability and security for the most vulnerable Charleston County residents, often of whom are renters in the community. It's exploring things like having a policy around the source of income protection so that residents aren't penalized, or that landlords can't filter who they rent to by where they get their income from and how they're going to pay their rent. It's talking about incentives for landlords, a similar sort of thing. It's targeting the landlords and helping them have security as they rent to sometimes folks that are maybe just a paycheck away from having issues of paying rent. How can you provide security for them? It's direct rental assistance for emergency rental assistance for renters, and directly supporting their security as they might find themselves in tenuous circumstances. So strategies like that, policies and programs like that to support renters. And then the final one is really focused on the home ownership side of things. How do we preserve and maintain and support the homeowners we already have? And how do we make home ownership actually an attainable goal for those that want to move from renting into home ownership? And, this could be, direct down payment assistance and education so that new homeowners actually know what it takes to get involved in home ownership and how to sustain that. For existing residents, it could be emergency home repair programs so that, especially on the lower income side, if an emergency happens, they don't risk being, removed from their home, evicted from their home, or foreclosed because they can't make an emergency repair or an emergency payment. So again, kind of exploring the policies, programs, and capacity around home ownership, rental, production, preservation, and capacity building around, the issues of housing. So that's kind of moved us through 3/4 of our planning process, and we've been spending, as I said, the first half of this year really understanding those in a very deep and meaningful way, working with the steering committee and the staff to start to, really bring fleshing out the plan to understand that. As we look, at these whole host of strategies, yes, I said some of them are policy, some of them are partnerships, but some of them definitely do benefit from a dedicated source of funding. When we're looking at this list here, we could be talking about direct supports to residents. We talked about emergency repair for homeowners or renters. We're talking about that capacity building, that training and education for the folks delivering the services and the product. And we're also talking about directly supporting the production of new housing. And that's what all of these really touch on one way or the other. And so, yes, a group of these strategies will benefit from that dedicated source of funding. So we started thinking about, well, how do you do that? We started pulling from examples of communities where we've worked very intimately with, putting a strategy together, but also implementing the strategy, implementing these dedicated funds. And here are I'll call it a laundry list, but here's a targeted list of ways that communities that we know from research and experience have funded their dedicated housing funds. You can see dedicated taxes, property tax, accommodation tax, hospitality tax. You can see dedicated fees, short-term rentals, document recording fees, building permit fees have all come into play in various ways in other communities. You've used and dedicated a portion of your ARPA funds, and communities across the country are doing that, taking advantage of this, new funding source to interject and start, under funding of housing initiatives. So we have this list, and we've pulled this list together. And then we started talking to the county legal department, with the county fiscal department, and staff, doing a little bit more research and understanding what's possible here in Charleston County. What can we actually say is good out of this list to move forward as we think about implementation? And here's where we've landed, as I said, with input from legal, with input from fiscal, and additional research. And I'm going to start from the red and work to the green. Let's start with what we can't do and get to what we can do. And really, when you look at the red, these are not available to Charleston County for housing initiatives. So yes, some of these are able to be done, like accommodation tax, a hospitality tax, short-term rental. They can be done, but they're already state mandated, directed towards specific things that can't be redirected to housing. And excise tax isn't even an opportunity for Charleston County. The yellow ones are possible. They can be used for housing initiatives, but then we start to think about, well, how much, how impactful, how can we use them? And in a lot of ways, it's not possible to raise additional revenue with these. What we're looking at is the ability to possibly redirect existing revenues. And that is very much a policy and political decision. And so, yes, it's there. We aren't going to raise new revenue, but perhaps you're using this tool already and we could shift it to housing. And that's a conversation that could be had. But it's not necessarily a sustaining one, because then we're really still talking about the competing nature of where these fees are currently going. So what that leaves us with is those in the green, and you can see it's property tax, it's development impact fees, and building permit fees. And yes, they're available for housing initiatives. Yes, you can actually raise additional revenue with these, and also possibly redirect, where you're using them now, redirect them to housing if you didn't raise additional fees. I'd say, one thing I want to say about this is that development impact fees and building permit fees are very cyclical, right? And probably much more impacted by turns in the market much more quickly than a property tax. And I think they are also, it's fair to say, generating less revenue than the property tax that you see here. So we take this understanding and really, and these are unique to Charleston County. These are unique to South Carolina, and these are different than what we've done in other communities because we've had other different kinds of opportunities there. But we start to take these and understand this as the implementation piece. As I said, we're looking at funding, we're looking at phasing and partnerships, and this is that funding piece that we would use to consider, okay, we've got a list of strategies, we have a sense of how we can fund those that really need a dedicated source of funding. Now we think about the phasing. And this is, probably pretty straightforward, right? Near term, medium term, long term, we're thinking of splitting this up over that 10-year period that we're looking at. In the near term, we're looking at impactful, easy to reach kind of opportunities to build capacity for future work, to establish the resources that we need for future work, and then actually using the resources we have now to target what we need, what we say we want to do, and working through. And some of these, there might be legislation and advocacy and other things that need to happen in the long term, but we need to start on them now because we know it's going to take 6 or 10 years to actually make change. And so that's what you see on the phasing side of things. This is just a snapshot. Also, when the plan is done, this is what we'll understand with the steering committee and staff of where you could go from this moment looking forward. You will reevaluate this almost on an annual basis to understand, are there new opportunities? Are there new funding sources that we didn't know about, like ARPA, that might change how we think about these in that phasing? But that's what that is. And that's the kind of the final component really as we think about implementation. So here we are. We're really focused. We've done a lot of work over the last 8 months, defining the needs, the goals, and the strategies. We're working with the steering committee and the staff and getting input from the community on those implementation phases. We'll continue to fine tune the funding aspects, and we'll work with the steering committee and staff on the phasing aspects and who the partners are that are out there. And we're going to be doing that over the months of August and September and really coming together into a draft plan that will be presented to the community at workshops in September, early September, mid-September. We'll be back in town on September 12th, 12th, 13th, and 14th for another steering committee, for 3 workshops, a drop-in session. We might do something with the Chamber of Commerce. We'll follow that up a week later with a virtual town hall for anyone that wasn't able to participate. We'll continue to refine the plan that we present at those community meetings and have a draft plan for you all to consider with revisions in October and and go through that adoption process and have all of that community conversation and the draft plan in place before November. And so I think with that, I think I'm at 25 minutes here. I hope that might have been a little longer than we expected, but hopefully that gives you a sense of where we've been and where we're going, how much work has been done over the last 8 months, and the kind of work that we're going to do over the next 2 months, as I said, with staff and the steering committee to deliver you all the Housing Our Future comprehensive housing plan. And I will turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, sir. So now I'm going to move down to my left to Mr. Werman. Any questions or comments?
Yes, I have a couple of questions here. And I appreciate all the work y'all have done. Obviously, y'all have certainly put in a lot of analysis here. I'm just, the first is a pretty straightforward question. I'm just having a little bit of trouble with the slide on page 8. It's got these references to current demand. I'm just understanding that the numbers I'm seeing here would all be new demand. I just don't understand the reference to current demand on that slide on page 8.
Yeah, Miriam, you want to say a little bit about that?
I guess it would be the next, maybe I'm,
Slide you're referring to?
I guess it would be the next one.
Oh, the next one.
Sorry.
I see. Yeah, so current demand refers to pent-up demand and a shortage of units currently that we see in the market at these different price points, and whether rental or for sale. So if you could deliver this housing now, there would be demand for it.
Okay, very good. And I guess there's some sort of estimate there. I see on slide, I guess 23, where we've got the near term, medium term, long term. I see, establishing the sources, which is a lot of what we're here to do today, is placed in the near term, 0 to 2 years. Can y'all speak a little bit on that and the need for that, and why that's placed in that category and not in one of the other two?
Yeah, I'll start with that, and then Miriam, feel free to add anything. I think the importance from our perspective of that being in the near term is really about sustaining, kind of just, I'm going to say just starting, just do it, just get started, but then also sustaining. And so I say those two things because sometimes we work in communities that haven't done really a whole lot of anything other than perhaps their traditional HUD-funded CDBG home funds kind of programs, and they're wanting to do something more, and they just have never done something more. Recently, we've been working in communities such as Charleston County, where the ARPA funds have become that first phase, that just do it phase, and kind of get started doing something to meet these challenges. And so what I think we would say is that, the next phase of that is, how do you sustain the momentum that you create from that $20 million ARPA fund investment over the next 5 years? And if you start now, it's developing kind of the funding stream, the expectation that the funds will be there, so that developers who, they don't develop instantly, right? So they've got a lead time that they need to develop their projects, 1-2 years, to actually get something that's going to be ready to be, ready to be done. And so if they know that funding is going to be there after the ARPA funds have needed to be spent because of the limitations of ARPA and the dedication and spending timeframes for that, if they know there are going to be additional dedicated funds from that moving forward, then there's a kind of a certainty and a security and a commitment that says, hey, okay, so as things get closer to those ARPA deadlines, I'm going to continue to work on my projects and develop those, knowing and being secure that I'm investing in that, because there's going to be funds post that ARPA investment, that ARPA infusion, to do that. And I think that's maybe how I would start the answer to that.
I appreciate it, and maybe I'll just close, and this is frankly more of a comment, but I would like to, I guess, gauge y'all's understanding, if I've kind of got this right, to kind of pick up where you left off. You know, and y'all spoke about the sort of ecosystem's capacity. I have certainly heard that you know, in following these efforts, that you know, we have made a lot of efforts to see, you know, what can we get going in the pipeline. And it strikes me as a situation where we've got a little bit of a chicken and egg situation here, where you know, maybe we don't have the pipeline that we would want, but we've kind of got to take that first step here. In the absence of that secure and reliable funding stream, that's part of the reason why the pipeline doesn't exist. Am I understanding that correctly?
I think so. I think I understand what you said. I think, yes, I think what we've been talking about, as I'll just call it the internal team, right? Staff and steering committee and us as the consultants have been talking about using some of those ARPA funds to build that capacity, and then, you know, taking that ARPA funds to actually do some production right now as we continue to develop that capacity. And if I understand, so yes, there's a bit of a chicken and egg. I think you've started though with what you're trying to do with the ARPA funds, that maybe there's a little bit of a less of a chicken and egg, unless I'm not catching your question. Because I think you've already started the process. I think you're, you know, you're cracking the eggs and making the omelets, if we're going to carry a metaphor too far, right? And I think that's where you're headed. And the idea would be that the ecosystem, you know, kind of gets its legs under it over the next 3 to 5 years, you know, or 3 to 4 years of the ARPA funds, to say, okay, we're ready to do more. And I think that's what I was trying to say, is that a dedicated funding source starting now and building that up would be ready to go once you've had to commit and spend those funds. So I'm sorry if I missed your question, but that's
very good. No, I think you've generally got it. I'll pass it along. I think what I'm concerned about here, and you know, for the purposes of today, is I am concerned about generating that momentum and getting things going, and then shutting off the spigot, and what that means, not only for the future, but what that might mean towards, you know, the interest that, whether it be nonprofits or for-profits or whomever's going to be developing and building this stuff, the interest that they would have in doing projects in Charleston, if there's some of that uncertainty that remains regarding funding. Yeah. So I think that point is the one that I was concerned with. You know, with that, I can just pass it along and see what the other folks have to say. Thank you.
Mr. Moody?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Carney, Ms. Keller, for your presentation to the committee. I see a lot of those folks are here tonight, too, so we appreciate your time and investment. Certainly a lot to digest, but maybe just a few comments that kind of stuck out to me. The expanding capacity, the Ayers property, I really like the sound of that. Fixing, renovating homes, we've set aside $3 million. Mr. Darby started that process. Fixing homes, keeping people in homes is important stuff, and I think it's got to be continued into this process. Brownfield remediation, infill, I can get there on those too. I'm concerned about when I hear you talk about zoning, it seems to me like almost like sort of I call it a blanket. That's probably a little too broad, but Mr. Carney, I'd be interested, and you don't have to answer me tonight, but one thing I'm going to want to know is how do we take this to our constituents? When we each have 45,000 roughly constituents, and we have planning commission meetings and recommendations, and I keep always referring back to Wallace Lane in West Ashley, where somebody wanted to put some affordable housing, and the neighbors came out and went nuts. And people, they don't want it. They don't like it right next to them. The NIMBYs, I mean, I get it. So how do we just go and change all this zoning and just tell people, you know what, it's the best thing for you? I don't know how you do that. So I'm going to be looking for answers around that. The other concern I had was a little bit about the stability and security. Landlords, if I heard you, maybe I misheard you, is telling landlords who they can and cannot rent to, or did I hear that correctly, or did I mishear that?
So the idea is that Well, perhaps I guess I'd say perhaps yes. The idea is that currently landlords don't have to take Section 8 vouchers or Miriam, if you don't mind jumping in, I know there's a couple other pieces to that isn't just about Section 8. If you wouldn't mind elaborating a little bit.
Yeah, I think in your question, I hear two things. So one is the source of income protections, and as Justin was describing, that would be a policy change to ensure that people who have a Section 8 voucher or use SSI as a way of paying their rent, that they couldn't be turned away simply on the basis of using those as sources of income. Now, in our conversations with the steering committee, I think we've identified that maybe this isn't, one of the immediate near-term policies to consider. And yet this is something that we see have a really positive impact in other communities. But I think it's not rising to the top in our conversations so far as a top priority one. And then the other piece here, landlord incentive programs, that would be a more voluntary program to provide, a backstop to a landlord who maybe wants to rent to somebody, maybe with a Section 8 voucher, maybe with, who has been justice involved. And this landlord incentive would kind of give them that backstop to sort of get over the hurdle to give that tenant a chance. And often that tenant also would be given support in staying stably in that situation.
Okay. I get it, but if I were a landlord and the county told me, here's the new rules, I think my inclination would be to sell and just get it out of the market, because to me is an invasion of my property rights, in my opinion. Mr. Davis.
We go to Mr. Davis right quick.
So just to let me clarify, we do not intend to push that, forcing landlords to accept vouchers or whatever. But what we do intend to do, we're working with the housing authorities. We've talked to 180 Place, and there are ways to incentivize landlords becoming involved in the Section 8 program. What a lot of landlords find out is that there's a lot of myths surrounding Section 8. So we would not intend to push that on anybody, but we are working towards incentives and just a way to get landlords interested in the program.
That sounds better to me. And I like, too, the down payment assistance education. I work in that space. Those work. Those are good tools. The final question, or I guess comment I had, was the revenue sources. You've got a lot of different ones, and I appreciate you going the extra effort to find out which are legitimate and which are not. But I don't see a millage or tax increase. Y'all have been very creative in finding other sources of revenue. Has there been discussion about that or not?
So I think our understanding is that would be considered under the property tax at the top of the list.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Has this commission made a recommendation in that regard?
So, I'm sorry, let me step back. Was that a question for me?
Whoever.
When you say that commission,
has the steering committee made a recommendation to that end?
If I may, Mr. Moody, the steering committee, I believe in July, did make a recommendation to council. For the record, Kristen, I believe they recommended a 3 mil increase.
Thank you.
That was from the steering committee.
Thank you. I'm done, Mr. Chairman. Thank you
All
very
right,
much.
Mr. Sass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all. Y'all have done a tremendous amount of work on this. I appreciate it. I have a number of questions. A couple of them, I guess one of the things that I'm kind of curious about is there is affordable housing being added to the housing stock now. Do we know how much is being added, and is that taken into account in this study?
We do, and it is. Miriam, I don't know if you have that right in front of you.
Yeah, not all of the information, but we did look at kind of the past 10 years of history of how many units, particularly using the low-income housing tax credit program, have been built in Charleston County. And the average over the last decade is about 50 units a year, which is, it was kind of like one project per year on average in the last decade. In the last couple of years, we've seen that rise a little bit. But yeah, I think that is a main focus behind a lot of the strategies, is to really put supports and tools in place to help increase the number of competitive allocations of low-income housing tax credits to Charleston County.
Correct. Okay. I guess so. I think I read in the newspaper this weekend that Charleston County was working on about 600 units at this time. Does anybody know if that's correct?
City of Charleston.
Charleston. I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right. Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sir.
Yeah. And so that is correct. I mean,
Yes,
and
sir.
so is all this is going to be able to meld in with North Charleston and City of Charleston and Charleston County. And again, I'm going back where I always go, because I think that we need to have a sort of a regional plan to work on this together. So I'm just curious, so the work that you're doing for us here takes that into account, or we're just separate?
It does take into account the pipeline and kind of existing units across the entire county, so in every jurisdiction within the county. And I think the intent with the strategies, too, is that they could be layered with and used with programs and policies in other jurisdictions. If that answers your question. It is intended all to really fit together with partners in the county.
All right, and I guess I have maybe one or two more questions. On the housing demand by AMI Group, and I'm not sure which sheet that is. It's got the 0 to 30, yeah. No, it's the other one. Let's see, that one. How are we going to decide where we start? Where are we going to pick one of these groups, or what are we doing there? Do we have any idea about that at this time?
So no, and really what we will do is, with this understanding of the needs, and we will have conversations around that as we think about implementation and targeting, and some of that targeting is the residents we want to target, and some of it is the locations we want to target. And so there's, we will have those conversations, but oftentimes, Councilman, those kinds of very specific answers that you're looking for now are at the implementation phase. So once the strategy is done, once you have perhaps a dedicated source of funding, or you're thinking about services and programs that you want to provide, it's thinking about the implementation of those services and programs and incentives. It's that the implementation phase of those that you will think that your policy advisors, a housing, perhaps a housing committee, or your staff can provide perspective on where and how. And very likely it won't be just one or the other, right? You're not going to throw all of your funds or all of your programs and resources to the 30 to 50% AMI category, just as you don't now. And so it really will be at that implementation phase of saying, we have these strategies, we have this source of funding, we know what we want to try and do in the short term, where is the target that we want to do? And very likely you'll be at different points of the spectrum, depending on what it is what resources and programs and incentives you're talking about. So I hope that doesn't sound like a non-answer, but the truth is that you'll continue to have those conversations at the implementation phase once the strategy is done.
I think that's a very logical process to get to that point, and I just kind of wanted to know where we were. I think that's the last question I have right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Ms. Johnson,
Yes, sir. Thank you.
would you speak into the mic so we can hear your question?
Sir. Okay, I have two areas I wanted to get some information on, more information on, where you talk about reduced barriers to adding needed housing supply. And it's mentioned here where you plan to bring back units. And I was just wondering, give me some thoughts around, how you plan to bring back some of those units. I represent the rural areas, and we do have a lot of abandoned homes, from is property. So I just wanted to know, give me a little bit more information about that, please.
Yeah, Miriam, you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, I can a little bit. In our conversations with the steering committee, I would say kind of two types of approaches have come up. One is actually looking at whether there are any tax incentives that are available kind of within what is allowable for the county to consider that would just provide an incentive for somebody to renovate a property and bring it back online. So that's one, is kind of looking at tax incentives potentially. And then the other is maybe there are specific programs that provide renovation support, potentially supporting somebody in renovating a home, maybe or maybe not, tying a restriction to the affordability, the rent or price at which that unit is sold. But yeah, those two things have risen in our conversation so far: tax incentives and a renovation program.
Well, I guess you mean the renovation, a little different from the emergency renovation we are talking about now, that we have money set aside for. Yeah, and also on the next slide where you talk about support housing stability and security. Here again, in the rural area, I'm just thinking, the rental, the emergency monies may fit better in areas that is not so rural. But for instance, I just noticed there's a lot of trailers, not a few, a lot of trailers in my district. And probably because there is a lot of them that are put on heirs property. And it's hard to get funding to repair those homes. And I'm concerned that a lot of those people that have the trailers that are very old, that can't be moved, or we have seniors that are not able to do extensive work on their properties, may be dislocated, or have to get out of the area. And so I'm just wondering if you all are looking at how to address a large amount of trailers that might be in a situation like that.
I'll just say it is something we're trying to focus on. It is a very thorny, difficult challenge, as you described. But yeah, we do know, especially with the type of growth that the county is experiencing, that the displacement pressures on residents of this, trailer homes and mobile homes, those are really real. And so I'm not sure I have anything specific to offer right now, other than that it is really on our radar.
Well, I want to probably just suggest that maybe, since these people own their land, if we could come up with some way to maybe have a replacement program for trailers, or something that I did hear about people being able to borrow a trailer when we have seniors that are pretty old and just are not able to do anything else better than to stay just right there. It has to be some way to address those situations other than people being forced out of a place that might be condemned and they have property.
Ms. Johnson,
Thank you.
maybe modular homes would be something you can look at. It's not trailers anymore, it's modular. And so I do agree with you in that sense. If they own the land, it would probably be a lot less expensive to just move a modular versus building or rebuilding. So that could be something we need to look into, because a lot of times you can get used modular in good shape, somebody traded one in to get another one, and that would be a great idea. So a great point you brought up, but I think that's something we need to look at too as well.
All right, thank you.
You finished?
Thank you.
Yes, I'm finished.
Okay, Ms. Honeycutt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my fear in this is that we are getting way far afield of what county government can and should do with respect to developing housing. I mean, there are certain times when governments try to get involved in markets and it actually ends up making it worse. And I feel like some of this seems to be getting way outside of our lane. I just can never support being responsible for actually building and owning and maintaining housing. I mean, we have a housing authority that does that. So some of these concepts seem a little bit broad to me, and a little concerning. Land banking is an idea, and finding partnerships and leveraging those partnerships certainly all seem like they would help address the issue. But this is one of those areas where I feel like we need to tread carefully, because we can get into a lot of programs doing a lot of things that are eventually unsustainable at some point. So that's what I would say preliminarily. Secondarily is the question that actually brought us here, which was my directive to staff. But I want to make clear that seems obvious to me, but I want it stated for the record that this consultant is not making a recommendation tonight for a referendum. Is that true? I'm asking staff, yes.
That is correct. That is not part of the RFP or the contract. They will develop a comprehensive plan of which funding options are being presented to you all.
All right. And with respect to the timeline on the referendum, I mean, I'll be honest, I was the one who was making the motion last time, but I want to make sure I understand where we are, because this is at the 9th hour. If we're going to do it, it has to be done. Correct, legal? Don't we have a deadline coming up?
Yes, ma'am. The deadline is August 15th.
Okay.
The deadline to get it to the Election Commission.
All right. And today's the 8th. Okay. So less than a week away. I understand this is what makes it extremely challenging to sit up here when you've got a council, a committee that you've put together of stakeholders and community members who are devoting their time to this process, who have one recommendation, and then a consultant or staff who are maybe not on the same page. And so we're trying to evaluate this in real time on a deadline to do what's best for the public. I will say, having done a lot more research into the impacts of increasing property taxes right now, I remain very concerned, and think Mr. Reverend Middleton may have mentioned it, but I don't think I attached numbers to it at the time. But if we raise taxes by 1 mil at the 4% ratio, that's $12 on a $300,000 property. It's $18 on a rental property. If we go up to 2 mils, it's going to be $36 on a rental property, a non-owner occupied tax rate. And then at 3 mils, it's $54. And while that may not seem like a whole lot to some people, that cost is going to get passed on to the people who are going to be hurt the most, which are the renters, the people we've been helping for the past 2.5 years to get through the pandemic with all our rental assistance programs and that sort of thing. For that reason, I am not prepared to move forward a millage increase. I would like to see, and was hoping there would be a little bit more in terms of the substantive numbers, what the other fees and taxes, impact fees, development fees would generate. Because if we're going to have a revolving fund, how much revolves is an important aspect. But starting with the $20 million from ARPA is a much quicker starting place than the zero we had the first time this referendum went out. So I appreciate everybody coming, you too, Mr. Darby, on a Monday night to discuss this issue. But I felt like we needed to do it before the deadline next week. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Darby,
Nothing said, sir.
Mr. Swears.
Ms. Honeycutt, basically to follow up on what you have said, my biggest concern about anything we do with affordable housing is mission creep. I have thought that all along, because we generally began this process with, we would assist the cities, we would assist the folks that do these things for a living, not we would lead. And I know that's hard for elected officials to say we don't want to lead, but in this case, we really don't want to lead. We want to assist, and I think we really need to keep that in mind as this process goes forward. If any council members disagree and think, no, we need to be the leaders, we need to be the ones getting these things done, then by all means speak out. But my understanding of our program was to assist or to enhance other abilities to get these things done. Okay, that's my first comment. Also, Mr. Carty, in your experience with other programs, do most people have, or do they require measurable results? And I don't mean just units. I would be very interested to see if we could create a way of tracking taxpayer cost per unit. And I don't think it'd be that hard to do, but I think it would be very meaningful to the taxpayers who will be funding this in whatever form we end up doing. But is there a way, or do other areas that do these programs, do they ever boil it down to what is the taxpayer cost per unit produced? And one reason I ask that is a lot of times when we're talking about affordable housing, everybody's thinking, let's build big complexes. Let's build a 500 unit complex. And new construction, to me, is not very affordable. You know, so I think it's a huge hill to climb if we think we do affordable housing by building new units. I'm not saying we don't do any of that, but if that's the thrust of our program, it will be very important to know the taxpayer cost per unit. So are there methods to actually quantify or measure that once a program is in place and acting?
Yeah, I'll, before I hand this over to Miriam from kind of maybe an implementation example that we might have, I will also just say that I think when you look at I guess there's the housing production and the numbers that we're assigning to that, and yes, those numbers are real in the sense of our analysis and the calculations we're doing. But I would also say, just looking at this slide right here, right, we've got policies and programs and capacity building. So we're trying to approach, the Housing Our Future comprehensive housing strategy comprehensively, holistically. And so we're looking at it from the standpoint of not only production, but preservation and support services and building capacity, which is sometimes, could be all of the examples that we've shared with tonight. So I only say that because I'm sure you could get to a taxpayer cost per unit of just the things that are being produced, as long as you're not saying that all of the taxpayer money is just for production, because I think there's a sense that from our perspective and our holistic thinking about housing and supporting attainable housing across the board, is that it's not all just about production. And so, the sense that all of the money you're thinking about doing is only going to production, I suppose you could make that answer be yes, that's what you do. But I know from, supporting Daryl's department and other programs and services that are possible through the ARPA funds that you're doing now, but also, in the future, that it isn't as simple as how many units did you produce for the money you raised, because some of that money isn't going to go to production. So that's sort of a big picture way of thinking about it, or at least the way we think about it from that holistic perspective. Miriam, I don't know if you've got, if you want to talk about an example that we have on the implementation side and sort of how how that's being tracked or thought about?
Oh, yeah, only that, we have worked with a local government who, just established their first gap financing program, and we helped them set up tracking and monitoring systems so they could track the impact and success of kind of each program they were starting with. So that was true of their development assistance, both new construction and preservation, as well as they had a renter assistance program, they had a landlord incentive program, and they had home ownership program. So all of those, finding ways to really build in tracking and monitoring in the implementation is something that is very, very doable. I think the only other thing I wanted to add is, I think as we're thinking about gap financing programs as part of the broader strategy, I think one of the kind of characteristics of those is that they can be really set up in a way where a local government like Charleston County could be using its funds in a way that leverages other funds, 5, 6, 7 times over. And so those are units that would otherwise not be preserved, not be built, but just that little bit of additional assistance makes it possible. And so I think that point about leverage is something that we're really trying to keep kind of front and center in our mind, recognizing also the unique constraints on land and construction costs in Charleston County.
Just one more follow-up on that. Ms. Durant, you might could share with them, I've always been pleased that in our Greenbelt program, we have a Greenbelt cost per acre in there. And I always thought that's a very meaningful tool or very meaningful reference, because, where the other money came from is important, but I want to know the Charleston County taxpayer cost per acre. So I guess I'm looking at the same kind of thing here. Is there a way to, and maybe it will only be on projects that do involve new construction, but if we could quantify what was the unit cost to the taxpayer? So,
Absolutely.
And I don't expect an answer tonight, but I'd be very interested in us establishing that program.
Mr. Swears, you'll be happy to know we actually used the construct of the Greenbelt program and provided that to the Housing Steering Committee to help them to start thinking about the way we structured that for that very reason, to move toward that.
Good.
Mr. Darby, you want me to come to you before I go to Reverend Middleton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, my most humble apology. Working late this afternoon and rushing here late. And I don't know why a chairman set a meeting on a Monday afternoon. That's just my thoughts. Secondly, anyone who knows anything about me or my character, that I am not a pompous or an imperious type of individual. However, other than trying to help people, however, I'm going to be short in my humility tonight. Some of the most outstanding stakeholders of KJM, Reverend Darby being one. My mother told me years ago that my people, and my father died when I didn't get those people, that your people from Orangeburg, and that's where he's from, so I'm thinking we're a distant cousin. I know him quite well. He is a member of KJM. I know the McFarlands, both of them, Doctor and Esquire. Matter of fact, I taught their children. I also know Reverend Benton. Reverend Benton's father is my mentor when he was at Burke High School. And finally, I know Reverend Rivers. Reverend Rivers and I, we go back to when we were 16, 17 years old, when we were community activists and civil rights activists, what we would call the young NAACPers. So we go back a long way. I know all these stakeholders. But to preface that, KJM asked for $10 million. And this brand spectrum of things. Reverend Colin Middleton said yes, and Mr. Weirman said yes. I came up, I said, no, it's not enough. We'd like to have $20 million. Mr. Wehrman, don't know whether he talked to Reverend Middleton or not, but he took the mantle, fought for it, and he got the $20 million. Much to my surprise, because I didn't think it was going to pass, but this is what this young man had done. You may have been including that as well, sir. My point is this. I think there's an unbalance here. Again, you ask for 10, we gave you 20. We have yet to do anything with the 20. In addition to that, $3 million has been added to assist. And now we are asking for an addendum of sorts, an adage of a mill increase. I just don't see it at this time. I think we need to be frugal in our efforts, and I'm just thinking that we need to take a step at a time. Let us see what the $20 million would do first. In addition, it doesn't take a referendum for a mill increase, if I'm...
It does not.
It does not, okay. That majority of council. So I am going to say I am not, I guess I say anti-Cajun, because again, I'm not going to be pompous, but I know that I am the best friend you have here on county council. And I say that with all veracity. I know I'm your best friend here. I supported Cajun when it wasn't fashionable or favorable to do so. But clearly, I know Reverend Rivers is going to give me a call tonight, but I do not believe that I am going to support a mill increase. Now, basically, not basically, but in fact, I am a liberal. That's what I am. I'm not ashamed of it, as some folk are today. But there's a conservative side of me as well, and my point is, I think we need to firstly start with the 20 million plus the 3 million, see how it goes, and then if we need to come back to visit the mill increase. Pardon my being so verbose.
Thank you, Mr. Darby. Reverend Middleton?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to the consultants, Mr. Carney and Ms. Keller, who are on line. Thank you very much for this very comprehensive report. Council persons, thank you all for this discussion tonight. Everybody has had their say, and certainly I'm going to take this time too, just to ask a few questions. Certainly, looking at the plan as a whole, I was going to bring up the Greenbelt program and or the transportation, program, just generally as models for the county, that when an entire program as a whole serves as an umbrella of sorts, that potentially enables the county through a uniform process to provide common good that maximizes and in some cases overpaces the individual municipalities' ability itself. So I do feel that the county should be a leader as it relates to providing vision. If you would go to the slide where you have, I don't know which page it is, the housing needs, right there, that slide. And so when you talk about filling the gaps, and I'm going to go back to those gaps, but I wanted to look at this slide as an overarching umbrella, because again, the county does have the capacity, and we have the ability, and we certainly have the authority to look at policy and zoning sort of changes that could support these gaps and the scope of housing our future, the tools and incentives, public investment, partnership, and coordination. And certainly when asking the question, should that be our business? I do feel it should be our business. If you could go back a couple of slides where you had the actual housing demand, the 29,000 through 36,000 units. That is the totality in Charleston County over the next 10 years. And so when we look at the nature of the growth of Charleston County, it is a good thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing to have growth, and we have to be ahead of the growth. And the county itself cannot sit idly by as just a Monday morning quarterback or individuals who are sort of like armchair passengers along this journey. We have to anticipate what's happening within our county to include all of the municipalities, those that are urban, suburban, rural, what have you, because even communities that used to be rural are now suburban, and so the county, the landscape of the county is changing dramatically. And so when you look at the housing supply and the crisis, and so 29,000 to 36,000 units that need to come online within the next 10 years signifies the state that we are in. And I think that when we begin looking at the county's capacity, ability, authority, and imperative to jump in and not necessarily pass the buck to the individual municipalities, because that does not necessarily totally solve the problem. Charleston bringing on City of Charleston, and I'm on that housing commission in Charleston, bringing on 600 new units. They're trying to do the best they can, but we now need a coordinated, and I agree with Mr. Sass, a regional effort, and the county can be that broker, that honest broker across the region, making that happen. I wanted to go to the slide, if you would go back to that AMI slide, if you would, right there, where you say that let's go to the other slide, AMI, the slide that looks like that, right there, where you say that we need about 620 million in gap funding over the next 10 years. So I wanted to ask the question, particularly, what is the number? You said that that's 620 million, and that sort of covers the gamut of a lot of different areas, not necessarily just the direct housing costs, but for the county itself. But what would you suppose of that 620 million, the county itself over 10 years would need to invest or inject in order to meet those demands?
Did y'all hear his question?
We did. I'm
If you don't have an answer, just be
Right.
honest.
So you threw
I'll
out
get back to you.
you threw out a $620 million, and you said that all of that did not include the county's injection. So of the 620 million, since you certainly came up with that number, what hard cost would you say? Are you just looking at the 450 million plus the 170? But what of those numbers would contemplate the counties addressing this AMI issue?
Yeah, I guess what's giving me pause is the notion that the county's not going to come up with. Well, I think it's a question of how much. It's a question of how much and how the county wants to approach that. And I feel like I'm going to give you a non-answer answer here, but I think that there are ways to develop and build a pool of resources. If you have a certain pool of resources that allow you to bond a certain amount, you could extend those resources. This is, I guess it's just a way of saying that I'm not sure that there's a way to say, there's a way. I don't think that there's a way for me or for us to say what the number ought to be, because I think that is a number that needs to be, there are a lot of factors that come into, how much is the county able and willing to commit to this, and then also what are the different ways, like I said, perhaps bonding as an example, to extend those resources. That's just a conversation, and that I think you all need to have and understand. We can probably provide a context of how much can the different tools, let's say even just the 3 green ones that are there, on our sheet, how much they could do given certain scenarios, and develop a pool that you might be able to use and give you some sense of how much that pool could go to whether you bond or you don't bond. And I mean, we can produce scenarios like that. I think it's, I think that's the easiest way to answer it. I don't know that I guess I'm not sure if you're asking me that the county should be, right now thinking about, oh, you need to commit, $350 million over the next 10 years, and that's a number, and then kind of reverse engineer your way into a millage. I'm not real sure exactly what the question is. I think it's more of this is what we've calculated the demand and the need based on current costs and current gap analysis and that, and then how do you want to begin to tackle that, knowing that it is a big number and knowing that it is over a period of time, and maybe I would never say I would never say do some amount, and if you can't do that amount, don't do anything. So then there's a conversation I think you all have about starting somewhere, and whether or not you've done that already or you think you should do more. I just feel like it's very much a policy kind of question, and I don't know that there's an answer that we can provide to say, well, certainly you should be actually doing 350 of the 620 million over the next 10 years, and that's a target. I would say target an amount that you feel from being good stewards and achieving the goals you want to achieve, and what you're trying to do. It's whatever that amount is, and we can help inform that by providing additional information as we develop the implementation part of the plan. And you'll see that, I think, as the plan gets developed over the next couple of months. I'm not sure. I'm sure I'm not answering your question.
Okay, Corinne, question. So if they were to do a mill increase, it would be countywide, right? So people in the city of Charleston, North Charleston, Mount Pleasant, they all would pay for this mill increase, correct?
Correct. A millage increase would be on all taxable property
Right.
in Charleston County.
So to answer your question, the county should be responsible. The county could be collecting the money. If it was just for the unincorporated area, I would agree with you, how much we would be responsible for. But if this is going to be countywide, then we're going to be collecting the money, so we should be responsible for everything, but then working with the other municipalities. To answer your question.
Thank you very much, and I think that did get me exactly where I wanted to go next. If you could go to that slide that has the possible revenue sources. And, certainly, property tax was one of them, but I wanted to look at some of these yellow areas. What did you intend when you placed other general fund revenues on this as other? What did you all discuss as it related to other general fund revenues?
Well, Miriam, correct me if I'm wrong. I think that is just a recognition that you
the
could
general budget and pull funds from other places and reprioritize them for
Correct.
housing. Yeah, I thought so.
Correct.
All right, so let me also ask this about the dedicated housing source. And so not just, the property tax, the development impact fee, building permits being the green lighted areas, but you are saying that there should be some dedicated source in the general fund for housing.
I'm sorry, Councilman, my internet just cut out as soon as you said you're proposing, and I didn't hear the rest of that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I said the area where you talked about a dedicated housing fund, source of funds for housing, establish a dedicated county housing fund to support priority activities. You're supposing that being a line item or an area in the county's general budget.
So what we're saying with that phrase is that it should be something that is, it's the dedicated piece of that I think is important. And it's developing a mechanism and saying we have a housing fund and we are going to fund that housing fund in ABC, with 1, 2, 3, 4 resources, and that we know we're going to target X amount of dollars every year in that housing fund. This is how we're going to fund it. And so that the community knows that those resources are going to that fund, and that fund is going to be available for a variety of programs that would then get implemented by county staff and the county as a whole. So whether or not, so that's different than I think than saying, well, I guess it is saying that there's a line item there that says this is what we want to do, and it's a commitment from the county that it will do it. And if you have a source of funding, you're dedicating that. You're saying this is it. If you say if you're just going to this year redirect some general fund to that, and next year you might not, that we would not consider that to be a dedicated housing fund.
Thank you very much. And the last question that I have, if you can go to the implementation considerations phasing slide, and you have bank land for mixed use development and neighborhood revitalization. Can you talk about that? And you have that from like right now through 2 years. So why is that a priority now?
Miriam, you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, oftentimes when communities are looking at how difficult it is to provide affordable or mixed income housing, they wish they had more control of land to control the types of development that occurs there. And this is kind of a shorthand way of saying it was like there's no better time to buy land than now. I think some of the specific places we have in mind are places where the county might anticipate that costs and values and prices will very quickly rise, and where you would like to be able to guide affordable or mixed income housing. So near employment centers, near transit opportunities, and so on.
That's a wonderful answer. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Okay, so we're going to probably close in a minute, but I wanted to add it on to what Ms. Honeycutt had mentioned about the 3 mills going to $54, and then it would be passed on to the renters, the consumers. But not only that, I think the school board is fixing to raise their mills by, I think, 6 mills, if I'm not mistaken. That's what they have in their budget. And so if you double, if you do that, now you're looking at $162 versus the 54. Mount Pleasant is fixing to do a referendum for recreation, and so it becomes where it goes from a simple $54 down to maybe $200+ dollars. And where's that going to be passed on to? The renters and the consumers, because at the 6% ratio, it's only businesses. That don't affect homeowners, because homeowners don't pay property tax on, for schools, but when you're looking at businesses. So my point is, not only will this affect us, it'll affect the taxpayers of Charleston County generally if everybody is raising mills. And I think it may be rough to get somebody in Mount Pleasant or somebody else to vote themselves 3 taxes. Well, I've always said I was willing to let the taxpayers make that decision. This is a tough one. And what I don't want to do is put out a referendum that's going to fail for the second time, and it kills it for trying to come back a third time. So, we got some decisions we have to make, what's going to be best for us as well as the consumers, are the taxpayers. But I want to piggyback on Mr. Darby, what he said as well, too. We are doing the best we can with the least we have, but I think if we put something out, I met with some people this morning and told them if we have a track record of doing good things, it's easier to go back to the taxpayers and say we need more. But just listening to the council members and reading the post, I don't think there's enough support for a referendum, but we're going to, get to that at 1B. But I don't want to drag us out. If there is support, which I said I've always supported letting the taxpayers decide, but 51% of the people can decide for 49% of the other, and then they would be paying something they didn't want. So it just puts you in a heck of a position, but you got to make a tough decision. So if anybody has anything else to say on the consultant update, If not, we're going to move forward. Thank y'all for the presentation. Look forward to what's coming next, okay? So let us move to 1B, the referendum wording. Request to consider. What is the wording, or do we want to change the wording, or you want to add to the wording? What are we here to discuss? Because the legal side, she's already said what is legal, you know, and it has to pass the test, and it has. But I think some of you were saying y'all want more specifics. So do you have those specifics? We can talk to Ms. Ham and, you know, and her staff to see maybe would that fit into what you're doing, Mr. Swears and then Reverend Middleton.
Mr. Chairman, can I suggest maybe we take a vote on whether we are even going to do a referendum? Because I do have comments on the way the questions are worded, but that's a moot point if we're not going to even do it.
All right.
I don't think my tweaks will make a difference on whether we do it or not. So, but why waste time if we're not even going to do it?
All right, well, if you want to make a motion to do a referendum, or not to do, you make the motion and somebody second it, then we can take a vote.
Yeah, I'd like to see whoever wants the referendum to make the motion and get a second. But if not, it just dies in committee.
You know, I can't make a motion because I'm the chair.
Right. I'm saying if there is no motion, it dies in committee.
If there is no motion, it doesn't move forward. Right. Mr. Werman.
I will make a motion that we have some referendum this year.
You only got 7 days, so we got to find that in a hurry if you're going to do that, and I think your time is of the essence. Okay, is there a second to his motion? I'll second it for discussion. Okay,
Well,
Mr. Werman.
You know, look, I think, quite frankly, Mr. Darby's point is well taken, that we don't need a referendum, and I've been, frankly, a little bit having mixed feelings about making myself sort of the face of the referendum anyways. But we just got well, because frankly, I think we should just do it ourselves. I mean, and I'll be real honest about that. And, you know, I get the issue that I trust that these fees would in fact be passed on. You know, that's sort of economics. Granted, this is assuming a $300,000 property value. So I question how many folks in the, 30% or 50% AMI are in a unit that's valued that way. But nevertheless, we are facing a huge need. That was made clear. We are told that, time is of the essence. I think I was correct in saying that, these efforts feed on themselves, and we need to start chipping away at this. We have, would I like to see more, something a little more detail? I think I said I would. But the fact of the matter is, we put in place a plan to get this plan done. We have a procedure we want to follow to make this plan happen. Procedure that involves public comment and involves getting it out to the public. That procedure will in fact begin in September, which is before this vote would be taken. I know for a fact our staff initially put out an RFP that would have had this plan ready before. That was not possible to do. I assume that the folks who responded just couldn't do it on that timeline. I don't know exactly when the timeline got the way it was, but I know for a fact that this was not the original timeline. We've been working as quickly as we can. These folks have obviously put a ton of work in. We've got to get moving, and we've got to commit real resources to this. I certainly do not, if this is the only way that we can make that happen, then I certainly support it.
Anybody else? So what you're saying is you rather see this go forward and let the public make the decision, or whether they want to increase taxes on themselves? Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that I want to give that opportunity. If that's the only way we're going to get long-term funding for this thing, I would be happy to vote, just to do the millage increase ourselves.
Well, you might get a chance if you deal with the $20 million. So it's either or. But I just don't want to get on the referendum and it fails, because it'll never pass a third time. Okay? Now, once we make this decision, we can't involve ourselves in the process no more.
I get that.
We got to remove ourselves out of the whole process. So just wanted to make sure. So, if having none, Mr. Swears?
If I had to vote on it today, in the ballot box, I would vote no. Okay, I think though, it is for many of the reasons already stated, it is a strategic mistake to put it on the ballot in November. We have $20 million to prove that we can manage a housing fund properly and produce results. When the city of Charleston had a referendum for 20 million and it passed, that was huge. They thought that was huge. We have that now. So I consider that huge as well. But as the chairman said, if it loses in November, the voters are going to get real tired of answering the question. And if it passes in November, let's say it passes by 50% plus one, that means you have 50% minus one that are begrudgingly being taxed for something they didn't support. So to me, unless it's a strong support number for this referendum, I still would have issues with taxing people, half of the population that did not support it. So I just think this is the wrong time. 2 years from now, with a track record that shows we can manage this and that it is productive, I think it could pass with strong numbers.
Okay, all right. Ms. Salisbury, call the roll.
Oh, yes, I wanted to say something.
Oh, okay, Ms. Johnson, go ahead.
Give me a chance
All
here.
right, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I want to say that we tried to do this referendum before and we were rushing it and it didn't pass. And I feel like we're doing the same thing right now. We are not prepared right now for another referendum. And we just got through putting $20 million aside. That's showing that, we want to do something. We don't even know exactly what we're going to do with the $20 million yet. And then we're talking about going into a referendum when we don't know what we're going to do with that. That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I think the taxpayers would want to know just specifically what we plan to do with the money. And if we don't know what we're going to do, how would we know how much the mill should be? And then we turn around and say, well, the school board plans to add a millage this year, and what was another entity?
Mount Pleasant.
So we already know that those things are coming, and we're talking about taxing on another millage for the affordable housing that we really don't know what we want to do with. We just want to have this. So I can't see supporting a referendum again, and we don't have those answers about what we want to do. And if we don't know what we want to do, how would we know how much the mill should be?
Okay, anybody else? All right, now, Ms. Salisbury, you can call the roll.
Mr. Darby,
Does Ms. Weirman motion?
Yeah, this is to have a referendum.
Nay.
Ms. Honeycutt,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Nay.
Mr. Middleton,
Nay.
Mr. Moody, Mr. Sass, Mr. Schwiers,
Nay.
Mr. Werman, Mr. Pryor.
Yes.
Okay. The motion fails 3 ayes, 6 nays.
All right, so the motion dies. Okay, so there's no need to discuss that anymore. All right, we now move on to item number 2. There's a request from Reverend Milton. Reverend Milton, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And based on the consultant's report, part of their imperative was that we are in a noun market, and if we find land, particularly in areas that are skyrocketing in prices, that we should purchase, land now and bank that land so that in the future, as the county decides, not getting in the housing business, but having the land available for these type of mixed use. I would like to recommend, I did provide all of you with property, a 2-parcel property that is off of Peace Ferry Road, 9.89 acres, listed on Charleston GIS TMS number 287-00-00-023 and TMS 287-00.
286. It's got 6 on that thing.
Well, 286 then, -00-00-37. So Emily, if you would just,
Thank you. Good evening. I just wanted to provide some basic property information. As Reverend Middleton mentioned, the total acreage for the two properties is 9.89 acres. And we have been reported that there are 9.59 Highland acres of those two properties. The current zoning is R4, which does allow for 4 dwelling units per Highland acre. And the current number of total allowable units is 38 single-family detached units, assuming market rate units. So currently, in our ZLDR, we have by right density bonuses for affordable and workforce housing that meets our definition. So currently, on both of these properties, if 25% of the proposed units met our definition of affordable and or workforce housing, they would be able to achieve up to 8 units per Highland acre. Alternatively, with 50% affordable and workforce housing, they'd be looking at 12 units per Highland acre. And with 100%, it would be 18 units per Highland acre. And the minimum lot area would be reduced to 4,000 square feet. So again, I do want to stress that these are preliminary estimates based on the numbers that we were provided. We also did assume that 20% of the site would be allotted for infrastructure. And again, we were working with that 9.59 Highland acre number. And so from that, the following projections can be made. A maximum number of lots on the site of 82, and then a maximum total dwelling units of 171 units. Now, again, that would be if 100% of the proposed units meet our definition of affordable and or workforce housing. And this would require utilizing alternate housing types to achieve, such as duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, townhomes. And those are things that would require a special exception from the Board of Zoning Appeals. One more note I do want to make is that, the total number of units is site dependent. So parking, lot layout, setbacks, buffering, and other required site improvements might restrict those numbers. Lastly, I just wanted to show a photo of the proposed sites. Thank you.
thank you very much, Emily. Mr. Chair, if you could open it up. I would like to recommend or make a motion that we empower staff to begin negotiations to purchase these 2 parcels of land.
Okay, what is the price?
Right. Not to exceed $5 million.
Okay. Is there a second to his motion? And I'm going to second it for discussion. All right, so discussion is on the table. Anybody else? Mr. Moody?
Yeah, I guess I'm questioning not the part that staff is discussing, but why are we not in executive session to discuss this? This seems to be a contractual issue. It seemed to me we ought to be talking about this in the back.
I don't think it's contractual.
Just laid a number out. We just told the seller what we're willing to do. I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
That's what it's on the market for.
Right.
That's what it's on the market for. What is on the market for?
That's the comp, that's not the property.
That's not the price. And Mr. Moody, you remember, this would have to be an appraised value. Okay, it's not what the seller wants.
Have we gotten an appraisal, or is there any due diligence we've done?
This will be the
We would
process
have
for
to
staff.
do that.
I think he's actually to start the process, and then it comes back to us with an appraised value price.
And I have with good authority that the seller himself or herself, that they wish for this property to be contemplated for affordability, and they're willing to work with the county up to $5 million.
But you understand, we can only pay the appraised value.
Right.
Okay.
Mr. Pryor, I think
Yes, sir.
I still have the floor. I mean, I guess I'm not so opposed because it's coming out of the money we've already expended, but my problem is the location. The city has taken affordable housing units, either existing, in construction, or planned, from Dogwood Road all the way down to Church Creek. Matter of fact, the ones they've wrapped around Church Creek have caused the St. Andrews PSD's property to flood, which was such a big reason that the Greenbelt project across the street made all the difference in the world. But the people down 61 are sick of it. And there's apartments all along Bees Ferry Road now. Long Savannah's coming with another 3,500 units. You think the people out there raised Cain about a billboard on industrial zone land, what they're going to do when they see this, they're going to go nuts. So, using the money, and Reverend Middleton, I would object to or differ with you by saying now is not the time to be buying land. Now is the time to be selling land. You buy high, sell, or buy low, sell high. This is not the time to be buying land. The location is a problem for me. The neighbors of Hunt Club, all those folks that objected to that billboard on an industrial property, they're going to go nuts over this. So I can't support the location.
Okay, all right, Ms. Honeycutt?
Who's the seller?
It's some of the people, I think.
Who is it?
I don't know, I have to look at
Who
it.
is it, Mr. Middleton, Reverend Middleton? Who contacted you about?
The persons who own the equestrian stables.
Who is that? And who are those individual people?
SAS.
You know who they are?
I believe that's the Stories. And I have to disclose that my father sold this piece of property to Mrs. Story in 1974. We did not own it, but he was the agent when he sold it. So
It was my understanding from the paperwork that there was a proposed development. They had a planned development going in here, but they couldn't get some utility. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it was not a utility. I think they wanted more density, but this property was slated to be annexed into the city of Charleston, and the city of Charleston would not. The city of Charleston's density restrictions were greater than the county, and they would not permit it.
So they have all the water, sewer, and everything else they would need?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And I think we did that preliminary. Did we do that preliminary due diligence?
We have not.
Okay. I know that there was a wetlands survey that was attached.
All right. Where is the employment center and transit that are proximate to this that would make this an ideal location for affordable housing?
So again, Highway 17, which is Savannah Highway, as it relates to a transit route, Bees Ferry Road, the hub for CARTA, sort of comes right near West Ashley Circle. All of the improvements happening in and around Main Road, which certainly make it advantageous. And when looking at additional development that's happening right now on Bees Ferry, Glen McConnell, it is a huge sprawling area potentially for employment. The hospitals are right around the corner, so to speak, as it relates to Roper St. Francis or West Ashley, and 526 can take you anywhere in the county you wish to go.
Except James Island. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I understood. Where's the landfill in proximity to this?
The landfill is on the other side of Hunt Club, so it would be as far away from this property as, this property is closer to Highway 17 than it is to the landfill.
Gotcha. So at Bees Ferry in Maine, I'm just trying to make sure I understand. What's the nearest is Hunt Club the nearest residential
Hunt
neighborhood?
Club would be the nearest residential to the north, and I think there's a new subdivision almost, I guess, in Red Top that's being built behind it, or on, I can't remember the name of that subdivision.
Thank you. That's all I had.
I think that this type of proposal and discussion will be very appropriate next year when we're in a program and we're actually doing something. I'm a little troubled that this would actually be 25% of the $20 million. So that is a significant portion of the funds for a site that may or may not appeal to whatever developer would actually buy into this project. So I think, if this was brought to us, it'd be a little different, but for us to speculate on it, I just don't think that's the right thing to do. Again, next year, when we have a program and we've defined needs, I think it would be much more appropriate. And I'm not saying this necessarily this property, but this type of proposal.
Mr. Sass?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I have a question of staff. One of the slides you showed us earlier, that one right there, showed the maximum number of lots being 82 and the maximum dwelling units being 171. Are those, did I understand correctly? Did you say those would be triplexes and duplexes? They wouldn't be apartment buildings then? Is there, why, it would seem like, because I thought in some of this literature I read over the weekend, there was talk about 200 units on that site. And so I was just wondering what the difference.
Sure. So the maximum number of lots, 82 units, that would really cap the number of single-family affordable and/or workforce dwelling units.
Okay, so that doesn't have anything to do with the 171?
Correct, sir, because you could go beyond that by utilizing duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, and townhomes.
Right, okay. Thank you.
So that's the discrepancy, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Well, I did mention to Reverend Middleton, in terms of discussion, if the 5 million could be beyond the 20 million, as I mentioned to you, when we spoke, sir. So that would be my concern. If we could go beyond that, yes, sir, because I think the 20 million is a matter of what we told the folk at first in terms of the housing thing. We'll go directly to that. So if we could find million beyond that, the 20 million, sir, absolutely. Absolutely.
Mr. Whitman?
I took a look at some of the materials as well. I mean, look, if we could get 171 units for 5 million, that actually is pretty much spot on the estimate made by the folks who were with us just now, our consultants, to say that you're probably talking about a $30,000 per unit subsidy. And if that would in fact be for 99 years, then that might be appropriate. I would share some concerns about the location. I mean, I understand there's a lot of apartments out there. Quite frankly, my personal affinity would be more towards the Low Country Rapid Transit line, but of course we have to spread folks around the county, and we don't, obviously want to locate everything in one location. I mean, I'm interested in exploring it. I would like to see, again, how it stacks up against, we just took an action or a non-action that is really going to put a lot of focus on this $20 million, apparently. I was opposed to it, but nevertheless. And I just want to see how it would stack up in a framework. And I guess I am a little bit concerned about the fact that I don't know that we're going to be getting 171 units. I don't know that there is a developer to do that in place. If I could see that deal or some indication that deal was imminent, that there was something, a framework to make that happen. I mean, it's not entirely beyond the scope that maybe, we would get some money back on a 99-year lease or something like that. And we would have something revolving, but I really would like to see a lot more of that fleshed out. Maybe that's not possible. Maybe we don't have that option in this market, but at the very least, I think I'm just at a point where I'd really like to see how this fits within the scope of what our options are with regard to that 20 million. And if the motion on the table is to come back with us bound to a contract, I just can't support that right now. I mean, if it's exploring it, maybe in a closed session, getting a price that's less than $5 million, that would certainly be something I'd be willing to support. But if I'm going to show up here in a month and we're going to have spent 5 million of the 20, I think it's a great direction the project's heading, but I am a little bit worried that it's not there yet.
Okay, so Mr. Darby, let me ask you this question. So you're saying if we can get the 5 million from somewhere else,
I would consider it, yes.
You would consider it?
Somewhere else, like where?
Well, how much more ARPA fund do we have?
I'm just
Answer
asking.
to that. How much more ARPA fund do we have that's got committed?
I do have a question.
Corinne's going to look at me. Go, if you want to answer, Christine.
Oh, yes.
If I could, Mr. Pryor?
Yes.
At your in the next 2 meetings, we are going to be coming back to council to tell you where we are in accomplishing the goals that you set for us with the 80 million and how far along we are with the priorities. And we're going to propose to you a budget for the balance of the money that's not being committed in order to fulfill the remainder of your priorities. So you have committed $60 million. $20 million is being brought in a housing plan in September, and there is another $20 million that is left to complete the remainder of the priorities that you all established for us through the strategic plan. So I wanted you to be aware of what's coming up in the next 4 to 6 weeks, which includes the balance of the ARPA money, the priorities for that. If there is a change that council would like to do to not accomplish some of those priorities and redirect, we're happy to do so, but I wanted you to know what's coming in the next couple meetings.
Okay. So, Reverend Middleton, what do you want to do? You want to continue forward on what you made the motion for? Or you want to redirect staff to, come back with some more information as far as, what would it take if it's got the proper sewer, water, and then maybe, whatever price, and then we can discuss that at a later date. Would you want to withdraw your motion?
Yes, sir.
And just direct staff to move forward as far as, not enter into a contract, but, enter into talks or negotiations?
Absolutely.
Okay, so staff, do you understand that? Is that all right with you, how we said, Madam, the direct Walton and staff to sit down and talk with these people and see what they want, and then bring that back to council? Yeah, due diligence. Do your due diligence?
Do we have to spend money for that?
Yes.
How much money?
So, I have a question.
Mr. Charleston? No, they just go walk the property. Yeah, walk the property, make sure. Environmental issues, yeah.
So this wouldn't include an appraisal?
But this will include an appraisal. They're going to get an appraisal when they come back to us.
Okay.
Okay? And that's what we do all the time with property that we're interested in. We have to
Appraisal
do
and the
an
water
appraisal.
and sewer information we should get.
Yes, ma'am. We'll get to
Okay. Yes.
This is beyond this motion, but do we have the ability to direct staff to get to, I don't know what y'all's plan is for this department, how we're moving forward this future housing things, but to Mr. Werman's point, I would love to see people come to us with a plan like this that they can actually accomplish. In other words, they do the legwork, not us. Because to Mr. Schwieger's point, it's very speculative to start trying on our end to figure out what might be able to, and then you have a wetlands issue and you cut out half the units that you could have got. All of those uncertainties. I'd rather see groups come to us. Are we, at some point in the process, are we reaching out to stakeholders for those types of proposals?
Mr. Davis has already been doing that. Do you want to address more specifically?
Probably for the past 6 months, we've had out a call for projects all over the county, both nonprofit and for-profit developers. So they have been submitting their projects. The majority of them are tax credit projects that lost the state tax credit and can't move forward. So there are a number of those. There are a few smaller projects by nonprofits, and there is one land deal from a nonprofit developer where they have a plan to build on that site and they need assistance purchasing it. So we have been reaching out to developers. We have sort of lined up what the next 2 years would look like with ARPA funding, and that will be coming to you again on August 18th. We will be presenting the overall budget, and then on September 1st or 2nd, we will be presenting the plan for the $20 million that you instructed us to do.
Mr. Moody?
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we're getting way ahead of ourselves. We've directed staff and given them priorities that this council's approved. Why would we jump ahead of them and whack $5 million right out of that bucket they're getting ready to present to us in 2 weeks? That just doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Well, we hadn't done anything yet until they come back with information.
Well, but I think we've got to, if we're going to direct staff to go spend probably about $5,000 on a commercial appraisal for that size, and $5,000 or $10,000 on whatever ESA phase 2 you want to do, that's 10, 15 grand. I think we ought to vote on it.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you, sir.
you're welcome. Anything else? There's two things, Ms. Salisbury. The first is on the referendum vote, change it to a no. Okay, from a yes to a no, so that could be on public record.
Yes.
That I voted no. And secondly, with staff, where are we on 995 Morrison Drive? Okay, we've been dragging and dragging and dragging. It's time to get something going.
That proposal, they were submitted, and there has been a committee put together to include a regional representative also to address the regional aspect. I believe that's being reviewed tomorrow.
All right, so we should have an answer when?
Corinne, the process for procurement, I would need to defer.
So this hasn't been put out on the street yet?
It's been,
They're out and back.
it's out and back. We have proposals that'll be reviewed tomorrow. Or the group will meet tomorrow to go over, what their scores are on the proposals. We'll have to see what the committee has a decision, if they want to interview anybody, before we can bring it to council.
So, okay, so now I thought we needed they said a land planner. That's what I thought they were doing, hiring a land planner to give us the best use for the land, a recommendation. So,
Correct.
Master plan, all right, so we have hired a master planner.
No, we
No,
have
we
not. What, we have had 3 companies submit proposals under the RFP. The meeting tomorrow will be the committee members who have looked at those proposals and scored them. We will bring them together, we'll combine the scores, and then that committee will decide what they want to do next. If there's a company they want to just go with, or if they want to bring one or all of the companies in for interviews.
So this planner would just more or less give us the direction of where we need to go.
It's somebody to do a master plan the site.
See, getting back to what Mr. Moody said, I can say the same thing too. We spending money, and this council will make the same the decision. This land planner may come in and say, I want to do A, B, and C, and the majority of council says, no, we're going with something else.
No, I'm sorry. There's a correction there. The master planner is doing 2 things. Number one, they're going to come to council and present you with a number of options. They are going to say, we've instructed them to bring back what the site would look like if it were all market, if it were all affordable, if it were 80-20, and a number of standard scenarios. Then they are going to use their market expertise to suggest any other scenarios that they might know that we haven't thought of. That will come to council. Council will make a decision on which way they want to go, on which option they want to go with, and then they will lay out the site based on whatever it is you decide.
All right. Well, it sounds like to me 4 people ain't gonna have a chance, because I thought we said we were gonna set that down, that's for affordable housing. But I thought when we said planning, they were gonna tell us whether we want retail on the first floor, so much percentage of low income, so much percentage of medium and high, because I don't want people to think that it's gonna be some big monstrosity like they got down there now. Because there's no way down there for poor people to live, workers to live. And I'm gonna say it right now on the record, I'm not gonna commit to putting any more of these big high-rise apartments up there for rich people.
Absolutely. Again, we've given them some instructions on what to bring back. They're going to bring council a number of options. And the reason we're doing the full market rate option is because there's been a question as to how much the affordable housing would cost, et cetera. So they will be able to tell you, if it were all market rate, the land would be worth this. And if it's all affordable, it would be worth this. So you will have an exact number to determine how much the affordable housing is costing you. That's all that market rate proposal is about.
I understand all that, but we can do just like, you can do a 99-year lease on that property and have someone come in and develop it, and we still own the property.
That is exactly
So,
what the RFP calls
I'm not looking
for.
to sell the property.
That is what the RFP calls for, a lease, a land lease.
Yeah, so if people are looking for us to sell the property, I'm gonna be against it, because I think that's the only property we got downtown now that can help with affordable housing, and we'd be crazy to sell.
The RFP specifies a lease.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it. Anything else to come back?
Question right over
Mr.
here.
Chairman?
All right, let me go right to this question, Mr. Sass, first.
I'd like to go back, the Bees Ferry property. Has this property been listed for sale? Has it been on the market?
It has not been on the market.
It's not been on the market.
No, sir.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Swears.
Nothing from tonight is going to our meeting on Thursday. Is our meeting on Thursday therefore canceled?
We have to have a meeting on Thursday, right? What do we have on Thursday?
ZLDR.
We got the ZDLDR we got to vote on.
That's on Thursday?
Yes, sir. We have to vote on that on Thursday. Can we push that back to another meeting?
I mean, this was a,
You don't need to come Thursday if you don't want to.
this was a special meeting
Right.
specifically,
Right. So
specifically for.
So
what
let me
we
ask you
didn't
this question. If we push it to the 18th, when is our next council meeting?
So we could push it to our next council meeting. It just makes that segment of the ZLDR amendments out of cycle with all of the other ZLDR amendments, if that makes
Well,
sense.
and they
Y'all-
have a presentation for Thursday. There was a reason we did it.
Right.
There's
Y'all
a big
approved-
impervious presentation for Thursday.
I mean, the meeting on Thursday never existed until we created these issues for tonight. That's the only reason there was a meeting on Thursday.
That's correct.
We
And then
added to it, but now all the other, the reason we were gonna do it all went away.
that's right. So
We absolutely can
I was the one to
cancel
request it.
Thursday's meeting and move those items to the next council meeting. It just puts those amendments out of cycle with the amendments y'all already approved at first reading last meeting.
out of cycle, we have to re-advertise it, what you're saying?
We don't
No,
have to
some of them-
re-advertise it, but so some of them will get third reading on September 1st, and then the rest will get third reading on September 15th or whatever the next meeting is.
Council good with that, by moving the meeting?
Yeah.
And I'll hate not seeing y'all on Thursday. But,
Is council good with that? Okay, let's move that to the next
Okay.
council meeting. Okay.
Before we move on to the Bees Ferry, did we need a vote on the Bees Ferry directive?
No, I think, staff just could do like they normally do.
I believe that Reverend Middleton withdrew his motion.
Okay, so, but in order to do any due diligence, we don't need a vote for that? A
If
staff
council so
member can tell?
chooses, you typically operate under the directive method, which is totally appropriate if you so chose to do so. But if there is a motion made, council should consider it.
Well, we'd have to go back and reopen that, but I think staff knows what to do. I mean, the administrator has the authority to do up to certain things, so, I think we just go ahead and pursue it and then bring it back to us so that way we'll know. Okay? Meeting adjourned.
Sam?